after the Rebbe passed away, that so at the end of Shiva, so the Rebbe passed away the 3rd of Tammuz. End of Shiva, which was like the Yud Tammuz, I wrote up a Pidyon Nefesh. Pidyon Nefesh is a request of a note that's written to a living or deceased Rebbe or Tzaddik to, let's say, to redeem the person, the parishioners, the followers' soul. Pidyon Nefesh, Pan, we call it. You even write Pei Nun on top of the note, and then you write a certain like prayers, requests for spiritual and physical requests and needs, and it is and there's a specific nusach form of how you write it, and it begins with the lines Ana or Ana la'erer rachamim rabim, please to awaken rachamim rabim, great mercy. It's like the Yud Gimmel Midas rachamim, almost like the highest levels of mercy. So please awaken, and some people add mimker harachamim v'aslichas, from the source of mercy and slichas and forgiveness, and bavuri, for me, and you put your name and your mother's your mother's name, and then ubavur, and then because of, and then you put other people's names, and or if you have other people you're praying for, and then you add whatever blessings. Amen. So the Pidyon Nefesh, that's what when people go to the gravestone of a tzaddik, especially chassid to a Rebbe's grave site, they include this. They take this. They write a pon beforehand, etc., and then they read it at the cave, at the gravesite. That's why, if you go to the Lubavitch Rebbe's gravesite, where it was Shabbos in the old Montefiore Cemetery in Cambria Heights, Queens, you go there, you'll see there's even like there's built like this low wall around the tombstone of the Rebbe and the previous Rebbe, who are both buried side by side, and in there is piles upon piles, like mounds of torn papers of the panim, these tzetlach, these notes of requests and prayers that the Chassidim read. So these are pans. So you have private pans that people write for themselves, for their personal, for themselves, or people they know. Right. Then there's something called a pan klali. And the pan klali is when, let's say, a group of people get together to write a collective pan. Or let's say Chassidim get together to write one general Pidyon Nefesh in the name of all Chassidim through that, right? So at the end of Shiva, this is something moved in me to be inspired to go and to write up. I was then learning. I was in the yeshiva in 770. So the idea, the focus was that this could be the pan klali, the general pan of the Bachrim, of the Tmimim as we're known, the whole ones, because the name of the yeshiva is Tamchei Tmimim. That's the formal name of Lubavitch Yeshiva. That's the name that the fifth Lubavitch Rebbe, who founded Lubavitch Yeshiva, gave it. Tamchei, supporters of wholeness, Tmimim, like the word whole, Tamim, which is connected to our week's parsha, because our week's parsha speaks about the para adula, right? The red heifer. But the temima has to be whole, ashe'em b'mum, without any blemish. So that is the word tam. So seminarians of Lubavitch yeshivas, or we could say Bachrin, of Lubavitch yeshivas are known as Tamimim. Right, so this was upon Klali, a general note that was that I composed for in the name of the Tamimim, and also for the Anash too, which are the married Chassidim, and was to have everyone sign it and give like a donation, because the idea is also to give something financial to redeem one's soul, pidyon nefesh, right? Soul for the prayer. So, now we're talking a bit about like the Rebbe's yard site, which was this last Shabbos, and that I was there at the Ohel for Shabbos, and that I haven't been there in a while at the Ohel for Shabbos, and then I was sharing the first time that we went to the Ohel after the Rebbe passed away, so to speak, that all the Chassidim gathered there, was at the end of Shiva. And so I composed a pidyon nefesh klali, a pan klali, a general pan for the Chassidim, Bachrim, and
I'm going to just interrupt for a second, because before you go farther, I just want to point out that when you talk about the pidyon nefesh and pan and the acronym Pei Nun, that is also the same acronym found on each of the matzevos.
Right.
Pei Nun, which is Po Nikbar, I think.
Right, Po Nitman or Po Nignaz, right.
But so anyway, I mean, it may be coincidence, but I just wanted to point out that on each of these matzevos, it also at the very top, it says Pei Nun on all of them.
Right. Thank you very, very much. That's a very keen and important observation, and it could be for that very reason to be an allusion to the pidyon nefesh itself, right? So it's not just here buried, but this is like to read that the person resting here, soul is to be redeemed. And so for years, so what happened was I put this together, got the Lashon with the Anola Rach Rabin, was a full page, had Rabbi Yoel Khan and Rabbi Avram Shem Tov, who were the two main people in Lubavitch then were involved in the post Gimmel Tammuz after Rebbe's passing, and and they approved it, and we got several buses together, and we went to the Rebbe's fresh cemetery. Incidentally, I was at the Levaya itself, even though they closed the cemetery to Chassidim, and only a couple hundred were in there. And the way I got in was remembering how I snuck into the cemetery 6 years before. That when the Rebbetzin passed away in the winter of 1988, hearing rumor in advance that they're going to not allow the Chassidim into the cemetery because I was just overwhelmed, and that they're going to have the gates locked. So when we got near, with the vehicle I was going with this is 1988, the first time when the Rebbe's wife, the Rebbetzin, passed away. So when we got to a part of at the cemetery, they closed. The main gate was always closed, and that's not the way you go to the previous Rebbe's gravesite. Springfield Boulevard is where the main entrance is, but that's all the way at the front, where the Lubavitch section is towards the end, and so you have to drive around out to, I forget the name of the number street, and there's a side gate, which is the main entrance for the Lubavitch section. But so hearing that that's going to be locked, so when the car I was going to that gate. But before that, I said, "Let me out." I just on impulse, I said, "Let me out," and I got out. I thought maybe the front would be, they'd find a way to sneak in, but it was locked. The main gate was locked, and there I'm stuck alone. And then I look and I see that near me, like 20 feet away, there's like an elderly chassid there. His name is Leibel Mutchkin. He's from the prominent Mutchkin Lubavitch family. His father was a famous mashpia, Chassid Peretz Mutchkin, and a bunch of my friends are great grandchildren of his. So Leibel is the son. So he's already elderly, white beard. And he's standing there. It's cold, winter, we have coats. And he's there also. Who is Leibel Mutchkin? Leibel Mutchkin is an inside hero in Lubavitch. Why? Because right after World War II, in 1946 into 47, Stalin, after the war, because a bunch of Poles ran away from the Nazis, from the Germans, into Russia. So Stalin allowed Polish citizens to return, to leave the Iron Curtain, to go back to Poland. This is before the Iron Curtain even came down heavy over Poland. Poland was still relatively porous to the west. So, of course, there were a bunch of legit Poles that had Polish documents, passports, and were able to leave. But the Hasidim, Lubavitch Hasidim, took this as an opportunity, and they had a whole underground operation, both smuggling Polish documents back into the into Russia from Poland, and also making counterfeit documents and Polish papers and passports. This was an operation that went on for, I think, over a year or two or so. And there were ways how it worked, and there were transports. What they did is, the closest Russian
the Shalonim, they called it the Shalonim.
Ashalonim, right. So the closest city of the Russian, the easiest one with trains to go into Poland, into what was Lemberg, or what's known as Lvov, or what's now Western Ukraine, Lviv. So when Lviv is, and that is where Hasidim, once word got out that you could sneak out and through the underground Chabad smuggling operation, Hasidim started trickling into Lvov. But at the same time, this is at the height of Soviet Stalin paranoia, and in order to evade, they already started hearing that the people were becoming suspicious, local officials, that who are all these bearded Jews suddenly popping up here. So they even had to start making sure that Hasidim remain hidden in homes or places throughout the city of Lvov. Meanwhile, they had people making the documents and getting them together, rearranging families, making up fake names and relatives. And people just had to be on call, because you never knew when the next train will be ready. Because they also had to bribe guards on both ends. It was a complicated operation, and this all happened. They weren't sure initially if they should do this, because it was very hard to communicate with the Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, who was in New York and was already, after a stroke and very not well.
It was before the internet.
Yes, indeed, 1946. And so they weren't sure, and even some answers they got that finally smuggled into Russia, to the Hasidim, were ambiguous, and it was not easy to fully be clear on, because they had to be careful how they communicate, what they say. And also sometimes the answer took a while, and by the time it got there, the realities on the ground changed. So there were all these interesting complications. Some Hasidim got out. So basically, once they saw some Hasidim were making out. So the question is, do you sakanat nefashot? Do you jeopardize life? Or, since you didn't hear clearly from the Rebbe to say to leave, So they had a secret committee of elder Hasidim, but they also included a couple younger Hasidim, because they're more of the practical operators. So all the older Hasidim, when they had this meeting, if they should do the smuggling operation, all the elder Hasidim said, yeah, we didn't hear clearly from the Rebbe, we should stay. But young Leibel Mutchkin, who was young then, I think he was in his 20s or 30s or something, he said no. And he said he's taking responsibility to run this underground operation, smuggling operation, and he pushed, and he got Rebbe Mendel Furterfass, a famous chassid who was part of the committee, on his side to agree, and with that the other chassidim followed, and that's how it went. And because of Leibel and his operation and his crew, they saved literally hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds. The bulk of chassidim who, after World War II, that were out from Russian Hasidim of Lubavitch, original Hasidim, are in his zchus, merit that they're out. So what happened was, it got so bad that they even knew, or Leibel even knew, the last train, that there was this train that the authorities know about it, and that they're pissed off. A whole thing. With great chutzpah, he went on the train and was continuing to make up the lists and document on the train. He didn't even plan to stay on. He was going to stay over, but because he had to stay to the very last minute, he stayed on the train. The whole train itself was snuck on. He had the authorities who warned him that they're going to arrest him if he's caught next time. They have his eyes on him. They were on the train. What he did is crazy chutzpah. He got a last car, filled it up with the Hasidim, this transport, hooked the last car to the very same train that was taking out the top Soviet officials who were known. And at some point, the Soviets caught on, but once they were over the border and tried to go to arrest, but the train took off, started moving, and he pulled the pin out from the last car, and so the train where the Soviets were went off. So that was the very last transport, I think sometime in 1947. So that is how he got out of. So he didn't intend to be out of Soviet Union, but he wound up there. His family was still remained. He had two brothers, younger brothers, who helped him with that. They remained stuck in Russia. They went through prison. Brother Yussel and Mullah Shmuel. I knew them well. These three brothers who lived in Crown Heights, and I remember grew up with them. And even Reb Mendel Futterfass was also part of this whole conflict. He remained also. He wasn't able to come out. And in fact, Reb Mendel and these two Mutchkin brothers, Yussel and Mullah, were arrested, and they went through the gulags for years upon years. And others that were part of this, they were basically busted. They in Lvov, there was a sweep up, and then they found. And it also included a legendary woman pioneer. She was like one of the number one wanted people in Russia under the KGB. The Soviet Union, her picture was all over, they say, in the post offices, wanted her. And she's known in legendary Lubavitch heroine, Muma Sarah, we call her. Muma is like aunt. Muma Sarah. Her name was Sarah Katzenellenbogen, from a top Lubavitch family. And she was a major operator in this counterfeiting operation and smuggling Chassidim out. I want to add one more thing about Muma Sarah. What happened was, she had her own fake passport already made to go out, but she gave it up for the Rebbe's mother, Rebbe Simchana Schneerson, who she escaped in one of those last transports in 1947. And Muma Sarah eventually was caught, arrested, and she was killed. If I recall, she was tortured. I knew her son, Moshe Katzenellenbogen, lived in London. He passed away not that long ago. I spent heard from him about he was a kid when his mother was arrested. So she's one of the great legendary. There's a bunch of Chassidim that were arrested and never came back and tortured. arrested in the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, even 1950s. There's a bunch of names. It's very, very sad and unfortunate. But these are the ones. I'm just mentioning this whole story about Leibel Mutchkin, who I met outside of the cemetery in this winter 1988 for the funeral of the Rebbitzin. And we're looking, and there's a gate. The gate around the cemetery also had barbed wire above it. He looks at me, and he looks at the gate, looks at me, and he goes, Bachir, like, young man, come here. And he says, do like this, give me your hand, make like this. He goes like this, like this, right? So I do it, and he puts his foot on, and he's back in the Soviet Union, smuggling over the border. So it wasn't a normal gate. It's like a gate, just the poles up. You have to like shimmy up, and he goes over. His coat, the end of his coat gets caught in the barbed wire. He gives a tear of it. He doesn't care. He jumps over. So I go and I find a way. I'm younger. I sprint up and jump over with him, and we make it. And then we have to like jog like a mile to the other end of the cemetery, and we run, and we get there to see that whole thing. So that was in 1988. So 6 years for the Rebbe. Also, I sort of did the same thing again, and that's how I was in there for that day when the Rebbe, when they buried him. It was very sad and moving. I was sitting on the top. If you were ever there at the Ohel, the wall around, so there's the walls around the bottom. So I was on the top looking down.